So we knocked that white background thing right out of the park. Now we are here with this thing, which is a mailbox. And we can't use the magic wand on it, right? The magic wand we can use where we have either a solid color and tone for the object or a solid color and tone for the backdrop. Here, neither one, right? Here we have a somewhat complicated object against a fairly complicated backdrop. The other thing to note here is that it has very distinct, discrete edges, right? They are straight lines, they are curves. It is not, for example, a mailbox covered in fur. That would be a problem on a lot of levels. So how are we going to do this? We're going to do this using our friend, the pen tool. Pen tool is amazing. Did not mean to double click on that. All right, so I'm going to go here to my mailbox. I'm going to get the pen tool. The pen tool is P on the keyboard. You can also come down here. It's right there. Looks like an old-fashioned like fountain pen or quill pen. I don't know what that metaphor is about. And I'm going to go up here to the top. I'm going to go with that pen tool selected. I'm going to come up here to the contextual menu and just double check a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that it is set to path. That is super important. Having it set to path, that is literally the whole point of what we're doing. If you have it set to shape or pixels somehow, bad. So that's good. We're going to have it set to path. What are these other things about? I don't know. So let's leave them alone. All right, cool. So the way that the pen tool works is, I'm going to just start it up here in the sky, is that it draws a vector-based line. What's a vector-based line, you're asking? Well, so far we've been dealing in pixels, right? So they're little dots, they're little squares, whatever. They, like, you zoom in far enough, you can see them. That's what's known as raster-based, right? So raster is little dots, right? Made out of dots. You zoom in, you see the dots, right? You zoom back out, you don't see the dots, right? You enlarge it a whole bunch, you see the dots, right? If I take a photograph that is raster-based, they all are pixels, blow it way up, you can see all the pixels, and you're like, wow, I shouldn't have blown that up. That looks like garbage. With vector-based art, right? Vector-based art is mathematically defined. So it's like a curve, a line, right? A fill, a gradient. These are all things which, because they're mathematically defined, right? I can define a triangle. It's just a triangle. I can scale it up as much as I want, and there's no loss in quality. So that's the amazing thing about vector-based art. Fonts are an example of this. So when I go and type something in Photoshop, let me go ahead and grab my type tool. Great. There we are. I've got that lovely text, and I can come in here, move it around. When I, oops, I'm sorry, keep scaling everything. If I scale it up, wow, this mouse is totally making me insane. And bigger and bigger and bigger. And I go in and edit the fact that I typed in some random characters. So I've made that a lot bigger, but when I zoom in on it, right, it still looks super crisp. That's because it is vector-based artwork. It is mathematically defined. Basically, any art that you have on a computer, either it's a vector or it's raster. In Photoshop, 99% of everything we do is raster-based. For those of you who do work in a program like Illustrator, that's all vector-based. You can make it bigger, you can make it smaller. If you go into a store and look at a logo on some packaging or a design on packaging, those are almost always vector-based art. So the advantage of, get rid of that, our vector-based path is sort of like very precise. We can edit it afterwards without any distortion. We can move the edges of the shape around in a way that if I were to draw a plain old circle or a plain old square, we couldn't. It would just be pixels and that's it. We could go in and hit transform and distort it that way, but I couldn't go in and just like grab one of the corners of the square and move it without there being some impact on the quality of the image. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. Let's go in and draw it. So I've got my pen tool. That's cool. I made sure it's a path. Also cool. I'm going to zoom way in here. And the way that you draw with the pen tool is not the way that we draw with the brush. The way that we draw with the pen tool is by clicking one point and then another. And then it will connect those points with a straight line. So one of the things that's useful here, if you hold down the the space bar, you will be able to get the hand, and the hand will allow you to move your image around. This is useful because, right, if I go and like click and drag or something like that, I'm going to be drawing path. Don't want that. And I can't just like stop in the middle of drawing my path and go grab another tool. So we're just going to go and we're going to trace a line around this mailbox. You may need to zoom out a little bit if that makes your life a little bit easier. This is how, for example, silhouetting is done in e-commerce for the most part. Come down here, right, sort of watch where these shapes are. We don't want to cut off part of it accidentally. Come down here to the bottom. Down here at the bottom, right, everything gets kind of squiggly because there's grass and whatever. We're just going to approximate that bottom of that post. It will actually end up inside, quote unquote, the brass thing later on. As I go up the side, I'm going to cut in a little bit, right? I'd rather not have that background behind it. And if that means my mailbox post is a tiny bit smaller, who is going to notice? I will tell you who. Nobody. Great. Up here, click, click. Right. Remember not to click and drag. Just click, click, click. Up there. And you can be as precise as you would like. Now, I've got to this part, which is a curve. Now, there are two strategies in drawing a curve with a pen tool. One is that I can do facets. So I can be like click, 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 and I make a series of small, short, straight lines, and that approximates a curve. That's fine. The other way that you will eventually do, and I would say you might as well start doing it now, is that we're going to do these Beziers. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to click in the middle of the curve, right? So if my head is a curve, and it is, right, I just have one point here, second point in the middle, third point on the other side. So that's my first point, click in the middle, and I'm going to drag. All right, so you see these two kind of handles coming up? Those are controlling the curve, right? How far out I go, sort of like pulling that curve out there. If I go in really narrow, it's a fairly shallow curve. And then as I turn it, this takes some practice. I'm not going to lie. Most of the time people do it the first time. They're like, I don't even understand how this works. I totally get you. But once you get it, it's super, super easy. Well, okay, it's super, super useful. How about that? If you need to move these things around a little bit, right, I still have my pen tool here. I can hold down the command key, and I can move one of those individual points if I need to move it back because it's not quite in the middle. Again, command key, I can pull in that handle a little bit. And now I'm going to go to the other side, right? So we had edge, middle, other side. I can't believe I'm using my own head as an example. It's ridiculous. Okay, so come back up here. We want it to be basically equal to where the other one was. And once we've got that, we can drag it around a little bit. Right, I'm holding down the Command key, and we can adjust that too. So now I've got a perfect curve that runs right along that edge. Doing that, again, will make your life so much easier. We've got another big curve here. I'm going to go right first spring point, middle of the curve, and end. That looks pretty good. Remember, we can go in here and adjust these a little bit, holding down Command. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to facet this curve because it's pretty teeny tiny in the grand scale of things. I don't think you'll be able to notice the difference. Now, I've gotten all the way around my mailbox and I've gotten back to that first point. There's my first point right there. So when I go there, you'll see how the cursor changes. It changes to the pen cursor with a little circle. That is the circle of life. Everything is coming together, closing your path, right? So my path is an outline. Once we get all the way around and hit that first point again, it closes the outline and it becomes sort of a useful shape kind of thing. So click it, boom, all the dots like energize. And now if I go to Window, Paths, so paths are right over here next to channels, you can see that there is a new path there. It's actually been there the whole time that I've been drawing, and it's called work path. My work path is if I just start drawing a path, pops up as a work path, right? If I do something with it, just because I need something temporarily to draw a little shape, whatever, I can then, ignore it. Next time I go to make another path, it will be replaced by the new work path. If you want to save your path, and you certainly do because I'm going to be looking for it, just double click on that work path and we'll call it mailbox outline. Now if I go to make a new path, it will not overwrite the work path because there is no work path, right? It's a new path called mailbox outline. Work path? Who's she? All right, so I'm going to come down here, and if I look at my mailbox, I've done a pretty good job, if I say so myself, but you will notice there is a wee little triangular hole in the middle. Right, so if I were to use this to make a path right now, I would still have some of that background in there. I would like to add that to this whole thing. Right? I would like to have my path be this outside shape, and then I'm basically cutting a hole in the middle of it. We can totally do that. We just make sure that our mailbox outline path is selected. Come down here, grab our pen tool again. I'm going to zoom in on that, and I'm just going to click, 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 and close, click. Okay, so you'll see it didn't create a new work path. I'm just adding that to that existing mailbox outline. So you can see that there in red. If I click off of it, it goes away. That red outline is not something that's going to print. It's not going to show up anywhere. It's just Photoshop showing you your magical path. So good job, us. What are we going to use it for? Glad you asked. So with that mailbox outline path, selected, I'm going to come down here, and at the bottom of my paths palette, there are a bunch of little things. There's the solid dot. That means fill this path with whatever my foreground color is. That's not what we want. That's a terrible idea. This one is stroke the path. Oh, good path. That means take whatever my brush is and draw an outline all around the path. Also, not useful. Useful sometimes, in some circumstances, not for us, and not now. After that is this one right here. This says load path as a selection. That is what we want to do. So if I go ahead, right, I've got this selected, come down here, click on it, and now it takes that path and boom, makes it into a selection. So that is super helpful for us because it means that we can, once again, if I go up here, grab my layers, I've got an active selection. So if I have an active selection and I make a layer mask, Heyo! That is just incredibly awesome. We are total geniuses. Now, when we did that, right, we had a vector-based line, which means it is a perfectly straight line. There is no fuzziness involved with it. And while that is good in some contexts, it makes it look a little bit like it was, as it was, cut out. So I'm going to go back in my history right before I create a layer mask when I still have this active selection. If, by the way, I stopped having an active selection, I can always go back, click that mailbox outline, and boom, do it again. If you find yourself doing that and only the triangle in the middle is selected, you need to just come back here and click off of your path and then back on it. Because you just drew that triangle, it is, before you go and click on something else, it's going to be the thing that's selected out of that path. It's one element in that path. And so if you make a selection, it'll choose that rather than the whole thing. Don't worry about it. Just unselect that, right? Command D, deselect. Then click off your mailbox outline, back on your mailbox outline, and hit it again. Okay, so with this active selection, I'm going to come up to Select, Modify, and go to Feather. So again, just like we did before, we can use that to make the edges a little bit softer. How much softer? Gosh, I don't know. 1 pixel? Sure, we'll see how that looks. So now that we have that fuzzified, come back here to Layers, make sure our mailbox is active, hit the Japanese flag, and boom, that looks pretty good. So we've got that, we've got our brass thing, and we've got our background. What are we going to do? Well, I want to grab the Move tool. I have Auto Select Layer on here, and I'm going to move them around. I'm also going to shrink them down a little bit, rotate them a little bit. Easiest way to do that is with one of my layers selected, just hit Command T for transform. Right, that gets me free transform. I can shrink it down. And I could rotate it a little bit. That seems pretty straight. Hit Enter to commit. And now I'm going to grab this mailbox and I'm definitely going to shrink that down. Uh-oh. So I'm using Photoshop 2021 and I held down Shift, which meant that it did not constrain proportion because they switched that, which is dumb. Anyway, don't distort it. Shrink it down to whatever seems good to you and hit Enter. Now remember, I want this mailbox coming out of this brass thing. So, right, I need to have it coming out of there, right? So I want to at least have the brass thing behind it. That's cool. And then I'll position it so that it looks as though it's coming in there. And now I'm just going to use either the brush or the pen tool or whatever I want to mask it off. I can use the brush. That's pretty straightforward, right? Oops, look, I did that classic thing where I draw on my layer. I want to make sure I go and I click on the layer mask thumbnail, and now I can go in there with the right color paint and all right, didn't do a great job. Hit X to swap paint, zoom in a little bit, and do that again. Perfect. X. All right. So there you go. That is our beautiful image with the mailbox sticking out of the brass thing. If you didn't want to use the brush, you could do a work path, right? That would be a simple way to make a selection. You can use that selection to control where the paint was being brushed into. But I think for something like this, the brush is going to be pretty straightforward and will help you out. Also, remember, put the mailbox in front and mask off the bottom of the mailbox. Do not put the mailbox behind the brass thing and then mask a hole into the brass thing. That is, I mean, the result could be the same, but that's a much bigger pain in the tuchus. Okay, so there you go. You are now the master of the pen tool, and I'm going to come back with a little bit of info about Project 2.